In this short demo, we'll be taking a look at the update cursor, where we will be walking through the Alaska Roads ferry route problem from the previous slide. And we'll start out by taking a look at the data in ArcGIS Pro. For the update cursor, what we will be doing is taking a look at the Alaska Roads layer right here. So we can see most of them are roads on land, but some of them are ferry routes that go across water. If you take a look at the attribute table down here, as we saw in the slides, we have our feature field. So highway, different types of highway, but some of them are ferry routes, and we want to pick those out. We want to actually create a new field called ferry and have the ferry value be yes or no, depending on if it's a ferry or not from the feature field. So we'll be writing the code in an update cursor to do that. The update cursor is going to be using that Alaska Roads data where we want to add a ferry field. So in code, you can use arcpy.addFieldManagement to add a field to the My Data table, which is akroads.shape. I will need to update my path. So that is the folder path that my shapefile is located in. So now my data is the shapefile in that workspace. So I can use add field to add a field called ferry, make it type text, and it'll add it to this table. If you're confident that that field doesn't exist yet, you can just add it. However, this code right here is a really great way to check to see if a field exists before trying to add it. If you try to add a field that's already there, it's going to give an error. So what we're doing is creating a list of fields that have the name ferry. So if the ferry field is there, then we'll have one item in the list. If the ferry field is not there, we won't have any items in the list. So if the ferry field is not there, and there's no items in the list that gets created, then the length of the list equals 0. In that condition, then yes, we need to run add field. Otherwise, we know that the field already exists. So that's an easy way to check if a field is there or not, and if you need to create it or not. Moving on down here, now let's create the code needed to create the cursor. So right here, if you want to follow along, we're going to create the update cursor on that table. So we are going to use with arcpy.da, not dad, da.update cursor. And the syntax is the table, which is my data. And then the fields that we want access to will be passed in as lists, and it's called feature and ferry. Those are the names of the fields in the actual table. And then if we wanted to create a query, we could, but we don't need to right now. And then we name the variable that will get created to hold the cursor. We're going to call it cur. Then we begin our loop here to loop through each row that gets returned. And then we want to do an if statement. So we're basically looking for if the value in the feature field is equal to ferry crossing, and we can verify that in the table. If we sort the feature field, we can see it's actually ferry crossing, 2 words with capital letters, and that's how we would want it to be written here. So if the value in the feature field is equal to ferry crossing, we can think about that in plain English. How do we put it in here? Feature is the 0 index item of fields that I passed in up here when I made the cursor. So we reference that with row bracket 0. What we're saying is if the 0 column value for the current row that we're looking at is equal to ferry crossing. So for the current row that we're looking at, if the feature column is equal to ferry crossing, then we want to do something else. And in the if statement, that something else will be to set the value for the ferry field to yes. Here we're making row bracket 1, which is the ferry field, become equal to yes. Otherwise, it'll become a no. And then don't forget, here we have our little note. We have to commit the change by doing one more step. Let's take a quick look back at the slides. So cur.update row. So basically what we're saying, on the cursor object that we created, we need to run the update row method, and we want to update the current row. It's kind of a weird thing, but that's what we want. And we can actually just copy and paste it from the sample. There you go. And then at the end, it's always kind of nice to have that closure at the end to see what's going on. And in this case, because we're working in Python, we would need to make sure that two things. We need to make sure that the data is not currently in use by another program like ArcGIS before we go and run this, because it will be locked. And then after we're done, we want to go into ArcGIS and make sure it actually updated. So you would want to close this map down. Now I can safely run it. And notice that I see this evaluating the fields, ... So that's a print statement I put here so that while it's running this bit of code here, that's what I'll see. So that way I know what the code is currently up to. At the bottom it says completed successfully, and I added my own note as a reminder to myself, and it says go check the shapefile to see if it was correctly updated. So now I can go back to ArcGIS Pro and see if it actually worked. And that, in a nutshell, is how an update cursor works. Now you're ready to watch the last bit of lesson 4A, where we'll do a couple more slides, talk about data locks and SQL, and then you can start the lab.